12:30 мы заканчиваем. А в час следующий. Ну, аналогии с этой уже. Спасибо. Уже, в принципе, по моим часам уже начинать, да? Сейчас водичку попью.
Так. 11:15.
Очень хорошо, что кондиционер включить, чуть душно было вначале.
Трансляция пошла. Сейчас люди еще только отослал, подождем там 4 минуты, чуть-чуть начали включаться. Немножко увлеклись, да?
Да я что-то да. А дело в том, что я бросить не могла. Там как бы смысловую надо было либо уже здесь завершать, ну хотя бы ты мне немножечко сосуды голени и стопы. Ну ничего, мало ли, может еще нам придется читать, как раз нужно будет кровоснабжение. Ну что, начинаем?
Пока только один подключившийся. Я только отослал.
Ну все, тогда подождем, да?
Теперь они рассылают.
Ну скажите мне тогда, хорошо, чтобы я...
Там человек 15 подойдет.
Все, тогда я подожду. Предугадать невозможно было такое, конечно. Такой режим занятий.
Ну, с другой стороны, у вас как преподавателя в университете так легче, а в школах они преподы вешаются, им же надо все проверять, они же задания сдают.
Ну, я хочу сказать, что, как сказать, легче. Они тоже, вот, им очень нравится общаться. Мы проверяем, например, работу, они тоже паста написал, там ошибка такая-то. Ну, тут лаверды, ну, студент тоже сидит дома, ему понятно, ему тоже хочется общаться.
И потом я по собственному опыту знаю, тот, кто учит тебе, все рассказал, все показал, вот разжевал, в рот положил, а ты не так понял. Вот реально не так понял. Я сколько с себе сталкиваюсь, мне вот товарищ учит, ну, не медицине, другим вещам. Вот все идеально рассказал, показал, в рот положил. Вроде все делаю, блин, что-то не получается. Год-два проходит, блин. Бах, блин, так он же мне об этом говорил, я только дошел мозгами до этого.
А практика? Если бы параллельно еще показывали это все?
Да мне не только показывают, на мне это показывают, чему учат, и то все равно не доходят некоторые вещи. Пока где-то там внутри что-то не щелкнет, и сам другого товарища учу, уже все показал, все рассказал, сам ни хрена не так делал. Уже сам за него все сделал, говорит, вот видишь так, начинаю делать. Пока не поймет, проходит 3-4 месяца. О, смотрите, чему я научился я. Наконец-то.
Все давно известно, да?
Я говорю, смотрите, Николай, что я придумал. Да, вот то, что ты придумал, называется вот так-то, вот так-то, вот так-то. Потом проходит, что смотрите, Николай, а вот так вот, смотрите, вот какой-то хитрый способ придумал. Да, вот этот способ называется вот так-то, вот так-то. Так же и у вас.
Ну да. Ну, у нас еще младший курс, они первокурсники, им, конечно, важно общение такое. Тем более анатомия. Ну, показала я картинку. Ну, когда ты это увидел и руками потрогал, запоминается легче. Ну и просто еще не адаптировали студенты, они не готовы были к тому, что им придется так быстро перейти. Может быть, если бы они были настроены, что они поступали в ВУЗ и знали, что какая-то часть будет дистанционной, они, наверное, к этому относились.
Ну, анатомия вообще такая удивительная штука. Картинка все равно тебе не даст тот же самый позвоночник. Ну, увидел я, а вживую ты когда увидишь, это совсем другое.
А взаимное расположение. Хотя сейчас 3D-атласы, конечно, они дают, но все это должно быть мышление пространственное еще, чтобы понять.
Ну, вот я в своей жизни в разных ситуациях был, вот, реально по кишкам ходил, ничего, душа спокойна, а тут день что-нибудь чух, и как это глядать, что такое? То есть, ну, вот, сам человеческая психика такая удивительная штука, такая девочка, все такая строгая, повели нас вот, в прозекторскую, куда надо труп лежит, вся прижалась ко мне.
У каждого свои.
Олечка, успокойся, все общупала. Она все видит, все, она говорит, делай, что хочешь, но только держи меня. Пожали, потом, конечно, меня отругала, ногами попинала.
Ну, по идее, это нормальная человеческая реакция. Ничего в этом красивого
Вот,
нет.
мальчик без сознания упал, переживал. Ну, что, потом привыкнул, что ко всему привыкал.
Это нормальная реакция. Человеку разве это приятно видеть? Это неприятно.
Так, все, начали.
Good afternoon. Our lectures now is a term of our lectures is a systematic circulation veins. During these lectures, you with me study the following questions. First questions is a superior vena cava system. Secondary questions is a inferior vena cava system. Third is a system of the portal vein. And fourth questions in our lectures is the portocaval and cava-caval venous anastomosis. The greater circulation veins form following the following system. First, many others tell about the system, the cardiac vein system, because heart is have separately veins. Secondly is the superior vena cava system. Third is the inferior vena cava system. Fourth, the portal vein system. Anastomoses are formed between the veins of this system. The superior vena cava is a blood vessels 5 to 8 cm long, 21-25 mm in diameter. This vein has no valves. It drains the head and neck regions, the upper limb, the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The superior vena cava originates behind the first ribs connection with the sternum by united of two left and right brachiocephalic veins. This vein goes straight downwards. On a level where the third costal cartilage makes a junction with the sternum, the superior vena cava opens into the right atrium. The thymus and the mediastinal part of the right lung, covered with pleura, are situated in front of the superior vena cava. The anterior surface of the root of the right lung lies behind it. On the right side, the superior vena cava borders with mediastinal pleura and with the ascending aorta on the left. A little bit higher than the inferior vena cava enters the right atrium. The azygous veins drains into it on the right, and some inconstant mediastinal veins, and pericardiac veins of the left side. Many venous blood passes to this great system, to the superior vena cava system. First region who carry venous blood to this system is the region head and neck. Therefore, I start from this region, from the head and neck veins. Blood from organs and tissues of the heart and neck flows away by means of large paired veins: internal jugular vein, external jugular vein, and anterior jugular vein. The internal jugular vein drains organs and tissues of the head and neck. This vein, internal jugular vein, it arises from the jugular foramen region, where the sigmoid sinuses falls into it. There is a dilatation about 1 cm in diameter of the internal jugular vein near its beginning. This dilatation is called superior bulbus superior. On the neck, this vein goes first behind the common carotid artery and then lower in front of it more lateral. There is the vagus nerve near the internal jugular vein, before united with the subclavian vein on a level of the clavicle. These veins, the internal jugular vein, forms a second dilatation, inferior bulbus inferior. The internal jugular vein accepts blood of the dura meta-sinuses, while to the superficial and deep veins of the brain, the diploic veins, the ophthalmic veins, the emissary veins, and the veins of the internal ear fall. The vein of the brain is the first veins who carry venous blood to the internal jugular vein. These veins are subdivided into superficial and deep veins. The superficial vein collects blood from the cerebral cortex and drains partially into the superior sagittal sinuses and partially into the transverse sinus and the sinus of the base of the skull. The deep veins receives blood from the central great nucleus and the ventricles of the brain and merge to form the great cerebral vein. The veins of the cerebellum compose the superior and the inferior veins. The superior veins drain blood into the straight sinus and the great cerebral vein. The inferior veins drains into the transverse, sigmoid, and inferior petrosal sign. The dura meta contains several reservoirs collecting blood from the brain. There are the sinuses of the dura meta. The sinuses are a venous canal devoid of valves and located in the thickness of the dura meta at the adjustment of its processes of the skull. The inflexibility of the walls of the venous sinuses provide free drainage of the venous activity of the brain. The venous sinuses are as follows. Transverse sinuses, sinus transversus. The wideness sinuses which run along the posterior margin of the tentorium cerebelli. It descends into the sulcus sinus sigmoidus under the name of the sigmoid sinuses. At the jugular foramen is continuous with the orifice of the internal jugular vein. All the other sinuses drain into it either directly or indirectly. The superior sagittal sinuses, sinus sagittalis superior, goes on the superior margin of the falx cerebri for the whole length of the sulcus sinus sagittalis superior from crista galli in the internal occipital protuberance. The occipital sinuses is a continuation, as it were, of the superior sagittal sinuses along the attachment of the falx cerebelli to the internal occipital crest and along both margin of the occipital bone. The straight sinuses, sinus rectus, runs on the line of attachment of falx cerebri to the tentorium cerebelli. The inferior sagittal sinuses runs on the free lower margin of falx cerebri and vena cerebri magna. At the confluence of these sinuses, transverse, superior sagittal, striated, occipital, a common expansion forms. It is called the confluences of the sinuses. The other sinuses, the cavernous sinuses, sinus cavernosus, is located on the base of the skull, lateral to the sella turcica. It is connected with the intercavernous sinuses, passing in front of and behind the hypophyseal fossa.
The cavernous sinuses receives the superior ophthalmic vein as well as inferior end of the sphenoparietal sinuses running on the margin of the lesser vein of the sphenoidal bone. The cavernous sinuses is drained of blood by two sinuses located behind it, namely the superior and inferior petrosal sinuses. Blood drains from the sinuses into the inferior jugular veins. The sinuses are also connected with the veins of the other surface of the skull through emissary veins transmitting through openings in the skull bones. The diploic veins and veins of the spongy substance of the cranial bones also drains into the sinuses of the dura mater, while the other end may be connected with the veins of the external surface of head. Next vein who carry venous blood to the internal jugular system is the specific vein, the diploic vein. Sinuses of the dura mater, diploic veins. This type of veins you see only here, only into the head. The diploic vein, vena diploica, drain bones of the skull. These veins form the vessels covered inside with the endothelium, which are connected with the dura mater sinuses and with the superficial vein of the head. The frontal diploic vein, vena diploica frontalis, is located in the depths of the anterior part of the frontal bone, and it is opened into the superior sagittal sinus. The anterior temporal diploic vein falls into the sphenoparietal sinus, and the posterior temporal diploic vein falls into the mastoid emissary vein. The occipital diploic vein is inconstant. It is opened into transverse sinuses or in the axillary emissary vein. Therefore, in our body present only four types of the diploic vein: frontal, anterior temporal, posterior temporal, and occipital diploic vein. And this vein has specific function, drainage venous blood from the bones of the skull. The other specific types of the veins who present only here, only in the head region, is the emissary vein. Connects the subcutaneous vein of the head and the dura mater sinuses. The mastoid emissary vein is situated in the mastoid canaliculi of the temporal bone. It connects the transverse sinuses with the external jugular vein or the posterior auricular vein or the occipital veins located superficially in the occipital region. The other, the condylar emissary vein, passes through the canalis candilaris of the occipital bone and connects the sigmoid with the occipital veins and with the veins of the external vertebral plexuses. The other third types of the emissary vein is the parietal emissary vein. Passes through the parietal foramen and connects external veins of soft tissue of the fornix, skull, and the superior sagittal sinuses. There are also a lot of small veins which are inconstant in their size and topography. The other intracranial influences of the internal jugular vein is the ophthalmic veins. Provide the blood flow from the orbital cavity. Present two types of the ophthalmic vein is the inferior and superior ophthalmic vein. The inferior ophthalmic vein passes from the front to back on the inferior wall of the orbit. It drains the veins of the ciliary body, the veins of the ocular muscles, the veins which are situated in the zygomatic bone channels. The inferior ophthalmic vein passes through the inferior orbital fissure, connects with the pterygoid venous plexuses, with the branching of the superior ophthalmic vein. The other vein is the superior ophthalmic vein, gases blood from lacrimal sac veins, from the anterior and posterior ethmoidal veins, from the nasofrontal vein, and from the shunt with the facial vein in the region of the internal corner of the orbit. The superior ophthalmic vein leaves the orbit through the superior orbital fissure, falls into the cavernous sinuses. In the neck region, the internal jugular vein drains the pharyngeal vein, the lingual vein, the superior thyroid vein, the facial vein, the retromandibular vein. Therefore, very visible internal jugular vein have two types of the influences, intracranial and extracranial. Intracranial, I explain you this intracranial. For example, sinuses of the dura, then ophthalmic veins, emissary veins, diploic veins, veins of labyrinths, is a labyrinth of the internal ear. But extracranial influences of the internal jugular vein is the veins who drain blood from the face, from the neck, from the auricle, and therefore extracranial influences the following. Pharyngeal vein drainage venous blood from the pharynx, from the pharyngeal venous plexus, which is located on the posterior and lateral walls of the pharynx. From the auditory tube, from the soft palate, from the posterior part of the dura. The dorsal lingual vein and deep lingual vein unite with the sublingual nerve to form the greatest venous collector is the lingual vein. Again, is the intracranial influences of the internal jugular vein. The superior thyroid vein carries blood from the thyroid gland. It accepts the superior laryngeal and the sternocleidomastoid veins. The other extracranial influences the facial vein drains the tissues of the face, the angular vein, the supraorbital, the veins of the upper and lower eyelids, then the superior and inferior labial vein, the external palatine vein, the submental vein, the vein of the parotid glands, and the deep facial vein fall into it. The other greatest venous collector, extracranial collector, who carry venous blood to the internal jugular vein, vena retramandibularis. Passing through the parotid salivary gland in front of the floor of the auricle, it drains the anterior auricular vein from the floor of the auricle. The superficial and deep temporal veins from the temporal and parietal region of the head. The retromandibular vein also drains vein of the temporomandibular joint and of the pterygoid venous plexus. You see these venous plexuses in our picture. This plexus, pterygoid venous plexus, is situated on the both sides of the lateral pterygoid muscles and borders with the maxillary artery and its branching. This plexus accepts the medial meningeal vein, the parotid vein, the tympanic vein, the stylomastoid vein. Therefore, very visible. Internal jugular vein is the greatest venous collector who present in the region of head and neck. The other venous collector of this region, the external jugular vein, is the largest subcutaneous venous trunk on the neck. It drains the posterior auricular and occipital region, the deep temporal region on the face. The external jugular vein originates from two tributaries, anterior and posterior, which unite near the anterior margin of the musculus sternocleidomastoidus. The anterior tributary is an anastomosis with the vena retramandibularis. The posterior tributary is formed by united of the occipital and posterior auricular veins. The initial part of the external jugular vein is covered outside with the platysma muscles of neck and by the superficial lamina of the cervical fascia. The vein goes downwards, crosses the posterior margin of the musculus sternocleidomastoidus, passing deeper a little bit higher than the clavicle. Under the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscles, the external jugular vein falls into the subclavian vein, or in the region of the united of the subclavian and of the internal jugular veins, or in the final part of the internal jugular vein. On its way, the external jugular vein takes blood from the subscapular vein, the anterior jugular vein, and the transverse cervical veins. The other vena collector you see again in our picture is the anterior jugular vein. Arises from small veins of the mental region behind the beginning of the musculus sternocleidomastoidus. This vein goes in the anterior region of neck, passes deeper inside through the pretracheal lamina or the cervical fascia. Then it goes to the suprasternal space, while forming a shunt with the veins of the same name on the opposite side. Thus, the jugular venous arch, arcus venosus jugularis, is formed. The anterior jugular vein terminates on a different level by falling into the external jugular vein, or the subclavian vein, or directly in the brachiocephalic vein. The subclavian vein is a continuation of the axillary vein. The subclavian vein lies in the first rib in front of the place of the attachment of the musculus calenus anterior. This vein is separated from the subclavian artery by a scalenus tubercle. Behind the sternoclavicular junction, the subclavian vein unites with the internal jugular vein. Therefore, here is the vein of head and neck. The other veins is the veins who carry venous blood to the superior vena cava is the veins of the upper limb. The superficial and deep veins are distinguished on the upper limb. They are connected with each other by numerous anastomoses. The superficial veins are better developing than the deeper ones, especially on the dorsal side on the head. I start from the superficial vein of the upper extremities. The dorsal venous network of the hand is located superficially on the dorsal surface of the fingers, the wrist, and the metacarpals. It is formed by the dorsal metacarpal veins, which have anastomosis each other. The palmar digital veins are situated on the palmar surfaces simultaneously. They fall into the superficial venous palmar arch. Blood from the superficial venous palmar arch drains mostly into the superficial veins of the forearm by means of palmar metacarpal veins situated on the palm of the hand. Most blood flows to the deep venous palmar arch, which forms the beginning of the deep veins of the forearm. Both arches are connected with numerous anastomoses. Superficial veins of the forearm form anastomosis, the venous plexuses. Basic superficial veins are vena cephalica and vena basilica, or lateral and medial subcutaneous veins of the arm. I start from the lateral subcutaneous veins of the upper arm. Is the vena cephalica. Arises from the lateral part of the dorsal venous network of the hand, being the continuation of the first dorsal metacarpal vein. Near the inferior epiphysis of the radius bone, this vein goes in the lateral direction. It goes upwards on the radial margin of the anterior surface of the forearm, gathers small veins and passes on the anterior surface of the brachium. On the brachium, the lateral subcutaneous veins of the arm passes in the lateral sulcus on the biceps brachii muscles. In the deltoid pectoral sulcus, penetrates the fascia and falls into the axillary vein under the clavicle. The medial subcutaneous vein, or vena basilica, is a continuation of the foredorsal metacarpal vein. It originates from the medial part of the venous network of the hand. The medial subcutaneous vein of the arm leaves the dorsal surface of the hand for the ulnar surface of the anterior surface of the forearm. In the distal part of the forearm, this vein goes on the dorsal surface of the forearm. But the anterior surface in the proximal part, it rises in the medial sulcus of the musculus biceps brachii, perforates the brachial fascia, and falls into one of the brachial veins. The medial and lateral subcutaneous veins of the arm form many anastomosis between each other. The most developing anastomosis is called the intermedial cubital vein, vena intermedia cubiti, which is situated in the anterior cubital region. The intermediate cubital vein forms anastomosis also with deep veins of the arm. Often there is the intermedial vein on the forearm, simultaneously located on the anterior surface of the forearm. It falls into the intermedial cubital vein or is divided into two parts, which independently falls into the lateral and medial subcutaneous veins of the arm. The greatest group veins of the upper arm is the deep veins of the upper arm. Arises mostly from the deep venous palmar arch, which accompanies the arterial arch of the same name. The deep veins are paired, the ulnar and radial veins. Also take some blood of the upper limb from the superficial venous palmar arch and from the superficial veins by means of numerous anastomoses. The radial and ulnar veins accompany the arteries of the same name, and they form two brachial veins by uniting. The brachial veins rise upwards of the brachium and unite to form one trunk, which transforms into the auxiliary vein on a level of the tender of the musculus latissimus dorsi. The auxiliary vein continues up to the level of the lateral margin of the first rib, where it transforms into the subclavian vein. The tributaries of the auxiliary vein are corresponding to the branching of the artery of the same name. The most significant tributaries are the thoracoepigastric veins and the lateral thoracic vein. The thoracoepigastric veins form shunts with the inferior epigastric vein, and they take veins from the prepapillary venous plexus, formed by subcutaneous veins of the mammillary gland. The lateral thoracic vein forms anastomosis with the 7 posterior intercostal vein. Next greatest venous collector in our body, the brachiocephalic vein. The internal jugular vein and subclavian veins of corresponding site unite to form them. The right and left brachiocephalic veins unite behind the junction of the costal cartilage and the sternum. The right brachiocephalic vein, about 3 cm long and 1.2–1.8 cm in diameter. It goes also, almost straight downwards and in the medial direction, adjoining to the cupola of the parietal pleura with its right side. The left brachiocephalic vein goes to the right and downwards behind the manumbrium of the sternum and the thymus, in front from the blood vessels arising from the arches of the aorta. The left brachiocephalic vein is 4 to 6 cm long, 1.5 to 2 cm in diameter. Every brachiocephalic vein drains the vertebral veins, the deep cervical veins, the internal thoracic vein. It also usually drains veins on the thoracic cavity organs, for example, pericardial, bronchial, esophageal, mediastinal, thymic, and inferior thyroid gland veins. of an unpaired thyroid venous plexus, which is situated on the anterior surface of the thyroid gland. Sometimes the brachiocephalic veins also drains the supreme intercostal vein, draining in 3-4 superior posterior intercostal vein. The vertebral vein goes together with artery of the same name in the channel of transverse process of the cervical vertebrae. It gathers blood from the venous plexuses, which are situated inside the vertebral canal, and from the suboccipital vein plexuses. The vertebral vein falls into the brachiocephalic vein of its side by means of 1, 2 or 2 trunk. The deep cervical veins of the neck is formed in the suboccipital region from the veins of the external vertebral plexus. It forms anastomosis with occipital veins tributaries. The veins descend downwards behind the transverse process of the cervical vertebrae. It drains deep veins of the back, of the head, and of the vertebral plexus. The bed of the thoracic veins accompanies the artery of the same name on the posterior surface of the anterior abdominal wall, near the sternum. The superior epigastric vein and the musculophrenic vein unite behind the costal cartilage margin of the 7th rib to form the internal thoracic vein. The superior epigastric vein goes on the posterior surface of the musculus rectus abdominis in its vagina, forms anastomosis with the inferior epigastric vein on a level of the umbilicus. The musculophrenic vein goes in the medial direction, heading upwards relatively on the diaphragm. Simultaneously, it collects blood from the intercostal vein from muscles of 5 lower intercostal spaces. The internal thoracic vein, number 30, in our picture, also drains the mediastinal vein from the mediastinal pleura and the fat of the superior and anterior part of the inferior mediastinum. The thymus veins, the bronchial veins from the lower part of the trachea, and from the principal bronchus of the corresponding side. The pericardiophrenic vein going between the lateral surface of the pericardium and the mediastinal pleura falls into the internal thoracic vein too. The internal thoracic vein collects blood from the sternal veins, the veins of the mammary gland, and the anterior intercostal vein. The anterior intercostal vein forms shunts with the posterior intercostal veins. The interior thoracic veins usually falls into the superior vena cava on the right side, but into the left brachiocephalic vein on the left side. The other region who you with me see now and veins of this region is the thoracic cavity. In the thoracic cavity again present many principal venous collectors. For example, is the azygous vein, hemiazygous vein, and hemiazygous accessory veins. Therefore, if your question veins of the thoracic cavity, therefore you memory these 3 greatest collectors: azygous, hemiazygous, accessory veins. I start from the greatest collector, the azygous vein, vena azygos. Being located in the thoracic cavity, drains thoracic cavity walls. The right ascending lumbar vein forms the beginning of the azygous vein. It originates from the anterior sacral vein located on the anterior surface of the sacrum. The trunk of the right ascending lumbar vein goes upward behind the musculus psoas major and anastomosis with the right veins, lumbar veins, and in the right renal veins. The right ascending lumbar vein goes upward near the right side of the vertebral column, enters the thoracic cavity through the right crus of the diaphragm near the greatest splanchnic nerve. When it comes in the thoracic cavity, the ascending lumbar vein is called azygous vein. In the thoracic cavity, these veins take the upward direction in the posterior mediastinum to the right of the thoracic aorta and the thoracic lymphatic duct and behind the right edge of the esophagus, in front of the posterior intercostal veins. On a lateral of the bodies of the fourth and fifth thoracic vertebra, the azygous vein turns around the root of the right lung, being in front of it, and quickly turns forward, goes on forward over right primary bronchus and drains into the superior vena cava on a level of the body of the third thoracic vertebra. There is a pair of semilunar valves near the ostium of the azygous vein. Non-lower right posterior intercostal vein, the right superior intercostal vein fall into the azygous vein. The azygous vein also drains the esophageal, bronchial, pericardial and mediastinal vein. The hemiazygous vein is its largest tributary. Therefore, next vein of the thoracic cavity, the hemiazygous vein, is less in caliber than the azygous vein. The hemiazygous vein originates from the left ascending lumbar vein, which arises from the anterior scalenus vein in the small pelvis. The left ascending lumbar vein enters the thoracic cavity between the crus of the diaphragm and transforms into the hemiazygous vein. The hemiazygous vein goes upwards to the left of the vertebral column, in front of the left posterior intercostal vein. On a level of the 7th to 9th thoracic vertebrae, it forms a flexure to the right, passes behind the aorta, the esophagus and the thoracic duct and drains into the azygous vein on a level of the 8th thoracic vertebra. Besides that, the trunks of the azygous vein and the hemiazygous vein are connected by several transverse shunts. The following veins fall into the hemiazygous vein: the inferior left posterior intercostal vein and the accessory hemiazygous vein, which is formed by 4-7 higher left posterior intercostal vein. The hemiazygous vein also drains the esophageal and posterior mediastinal vein. The posterior intercostal vein passes in intercostal space under the costal margin of the corresponding rib, accompanied by arteries of the same name and by intercostal nerves. They are situated between the rib and the posterior intercostal artery. Every intercostal vein forms a shunt in the frontal part of the intercostal space with a corresponding tributary of the internal thoracic vein, the anterior intercostal vein. Neighboring posterior intercostal veins are often connected with each other by intermedial anastomosis. The lowest right and left intercostal veins are called subcostal vein. Every posterior intercostal vein drains the dorsal vein, the spinal vein, the internal and external vertebral plexus. 2 or 3 lower intercostal veins drain the diaphragm and muscles of abdomen. The internal venous plexus, vertebral venous plexus, is located in the vertebral canal, accompanying all its length or the internal space of its walls outside the dura mater. The veins of this plexus drain the vertebral column, the spinal cord, and its covering. The external vertebral plexus consists of veins of no belts. It includes the anterior and posterior part of the vertebral plexus. The anterior part of the external vertebral plexus is situated on the anterior and lateral of the bodies of the vertebrae and on the deep muscles of neck. It is better development of a level of cervical part of the vertebral column. It drains veins of vertebral column, veins of the deep muscles of neck. The posterior part of the external vertebral plexus is situated on the dorsal surfaces of the arches of the vertebrae, on their processes and ligaments, and partially between the fascicles of short muscles of vertebral column. It is connected with the internal vertebral plexus. The upper shear of the posterior part of the external vertebral plexus is connected with the occipital, vertebral, and deep cervical veins. Blood from the external vertebral plexus drains into the posterior intercostal, lumbar, sacral veins and directly into the azygos and hemiazygos vein. Therefore, here is the veins of the thoracic cage. Therefore, if you describe the superior vena cava system, you must know to these greatest venous collectors drainage venous blood from the following region: head and neck. And here you know three greatest veins: vena jugularis interna, vena jugularis externa, and vena jugularis anterior. From the upper extremities region, and here you know two groups of veins, superficial and deep. From the thoracic cage, for example, here present the following greatest vein: vena azygos, hemiazygos, and vena hemiazygos accessoria. And then superior vena cava finished into the right atrium. Next questions in our lectures is the inferior vena cava system. Inferior vena cava is the widest blood vessels in the human body. It gathers blood from the most part of organs of the abdominal and pelvis cavities, walls of these cavities, and form lower extremities. Its diameter near the sources reaches 2 cm. In the opening 3.3 cm. Its length reaches 18 to 20 cm. The inferior vena cava is formed on the level of the intervertebral disc between the 4 and 5 lumbar vertebrae as a result of conjunction of the left and right common iliac artery. Back surface of the inferior vena cava lies on the lumbar part of the vertebral column and covers right lumbar, renal, middle suprarenal and lower phrenic arteries. The right surface of the inferior vena cava adjoins to musculus psoas major. The left surface of this vein lies close to the descending part of the aorta. In the abdominal cavity to the right from the inferior vena cava, the right ureter and hilum of the right kidney. Near the right edge of these veins, sympathetic trunk lies. In front of the inferior vena cava is located parietal peritoneum. The level of the 4 lumbar vertebrae, the inferior vena cava is crossed by a radix mesentery. In the abdominal cavity in front of the inferior vena cava, there are at the duodenum, pancreas, portal vein, and bile duct. The front surface of this vein, covered by a peritoneum, forms posterior wall of an epiploic foramen. Over this foramen, the inferior vena cava lies in the back part of the right longitudinal sulcus of the liver, where this vein is tightly bound to the liver by hepatic veins. The inferior vena cava comes to the thoracic cavity through the central tendons of the diaphragm. Then it penetrates to the pericardial cavity and is opened below into the right atrium of the heart. The inferior vena cava has parietal and visceral influence. Therefore, again, two groups of influence. Parietal, drainage venous blood from the wall of this cavity. Visceral, drainage venous blood from the organs of the corresponding cavity. I start from the parietal influence of the inferior vena cava. In the abdominal cavity are paired inferior phrenic and lumbar veins. Inferior phrenic veins a thin trunk line near the arteries of the same name. On the level of a foramen of the inferior vena cava, they disembogue into the inferior vena cava, inferior. The inferior phrenic veins in the diaphragm anastomosis with pericardiophrenic and muscular phrenic vein, which influence of internal thoracic vein. The other influence, parietal influence of the inferior vena cava is a lumbar vein. Is number of 4, 5 lie near the lumbar arteries. Each lumbar vein is formed by the conjunction of anterior and posterior influence. The anterior influence gathers blood from the lateral wall of the abdomen. The posterior influence from the skin and muscles of the lumbar region, internal and external vertebral plexuses. From the right lumbar veins, anastomosis with the right ascending lumbar vein. From the left with the left ascending lumbar vein. The lumbar also anastomosis with the sacral plexuses and sacral veins influence to the external iliac vein. The visceral influence of the inferior vena cava are paid. For example, testicular or ovarian veins, renal veins and suprarenal veins. Testicular or ovarian veins is pair. The testicular vein begins from the posterior margin of testis, forming the so-called palmatiform plexus. It lies in the spermatic cord. A testicular vein is formed after the outcome of veins of this plexus from inguinal canal. The right testicular vein disembogues into the inferior vena cava. At the acute angle, the left one into the left renal vein. The ovarian vein, vena ovarica, begins from the hilum of the ovarian, goes upward and disembogues into the inferior vena cava from right side and into the left renal vein from the left side. Small veins from walls of the ureter disembogue into the testicular or ovarian vein in the abdominal cavity. Next influence of the inferior vena cava is the renal vein, vena renalis. Is a paid, it goes from the hilum of the kidney in front of the renal artery. The left renal vein is longer than the right one, and it lies across the aorta in front from it. The renal veins disembogue into the inferior vena cava at the level of the intervertebral disc between the first and second lumbar vertebrae. The suprarenal vein has anatomical topography differences from the left and from the right. Right suprarenal vein disembogues into the inferior vena cava, the left one into the renal vein. Small suprarenal veins disembogue into the inferior phrenic, lumbar and hepatic veins and into the influence of the portal vein. The other veins who carry venous blood to the inferior vena cava is the hepatic vein, vena hepatica, are formed in the parenchyma of the liver in number 3 or 4 and disembogue into the inferior vena cava on the vena cava of the liver. One of the hepatic veins before influences into the inferior vena cava is conjoined with the venous ligaments, which is an overgrowing venous duct functioning in the fetus. Therefore, here is a structure influences of the inferior vena cava into the abdominal cavity. The other region who carry venous blood to the inferior vena cava is the pelvis cavity. Therefore, veins of the pelvis cavity drainage venous blood and then carry this venous blood to the inferior vena cava. Very visible in our picture inferior vena cava is formed by the level of the four lumbar vertebrae from the fusion or connection of the common iliac veins. This vein is the greatest venous collector, left and right. Interflow on the level of the intervertebral disc between the fourth and fifth lumbar vertebrae and forms the inferior vena cava. The left common iliac vein at first in the medial direction and then behind the artery of the same name. The right common iliac vein is shorter than the left one. It goes behind the artery of the same name. Into the left common iliac vein, median sacral vein disembogues. It goes along the pelvic surfaces of the sacrum, appearing from the anterior sacral venous plexus. The anterior sacral plexus is formed from anastomosing each other veins and with lateral sacral veins, venous plexus of the bladder, and with the external vertebral venous plexus. On the level of the sacral iliac joints, each common iliac vein is formed by interflow of external and internal iliac veins. Internal iliac veins lies on the lateral surface of the small pelvis behind the artery of the same name. It has parietal and visceral influence. The parietal influence by the topography and regions of spreading correspond to the arteries of the same name. The visceral influence are formed from the large plexus of organs of the small pelvis. The parietal influence are iliolumbar, lateral sacral, obturator, superior and inferior gluteal vein. The iliolumbar vein, vena iliolumbalis, goes upward behind the musculus psoas major and gathers blood from these muscles, musculus quadratus lumborum, and from the iliac bone. This vein anastomoses with the branching of the ascending lumbar veins, with the deep circumflex iliac veins, and with the lateral sacral vein. The lateral sacral vein is usually paired. It goes upward along the lateral part of the pelvic surface of the sacrum. It gathers blood from the sacrum, from the muscles of that region, from the spinal veins, outgoing from the anterior sacral foramen. Anastomoses with the veins of the vertebral plexus and medial sacral vein. The superior and inferior gluteal vein in their topography correspond to the branching of the arteries of the same name. The inferior gluteal vein anastomoses with the influence of the first perforating veins, which an influence of the deep veins of type. The obturator vein goes from the femoral region through the obturator canal. The visceral influence of the internal iliac vein are the internal pudendal vein, the vein of the vesical plexuses, prostatic plexuses, uterine and vaginal plexuses. Therefore, all venous blood from the organs and walls of the pelvis passes to the internal iliac vein. The external iliac vein is paired discontinuation of the femoral vein in the pelvis cavity. The external iliac vein gathers blood from the lower limbs and partially from the walls of pelvis. It goes upward along the external iliac artery and touches musculus psoas minor from the medial side. On the level of the sacroiliac joint, the external iliac vein interflows with the internal iliac vein, forming the common iliac vein. The influence of the external iliac vein are the inferior epigastric vein and the deep circumflex iliac vein. The inferior epigastric vein lies near the artery of the same name on the internal surface of the musculus rectus abdominis, and the anastomoses with the superior epigastric vein influence of the internal thoracic veins, with the superficial epigastric vein, who is the influence of the femoral vein, and paraumbilical veins is the influence of the portal vein. One of the small influence of the inferior epigastric vein disembogues behind the pubic bone into the obturator vein. The deep circumflex iliac vein is a paired. It goes close to the artery of the same name, the iliac crest. It anastomoses with the branching of the iliac lumbar vein and gathers blood from muscles of the abdomen and adjacent muscles of the pelvis. The veins of the lower extremities. There are superficial and deep veins anastomosing at the lower limb, which is other. On the back of the foot, on the dorsal venous arches of the foot is located, which is formed by the dorsal digital veins. From this arch, lateral and medial marginal veins begin. The continuation of the medial marginal vein is a long saphenous vein, vena saphena magna. The lateral marginal vein continues into a small or short saphenous vein, vena saphena parva. On the sole of the foot, the plantar digital veins interflow with each other and form plantar metatarsal veins, disemboguing into the plantar venous arch. Blood flows from this arch through the medial and lateral marginal veins into the posterior tibial vein. The vena saphena magna begins before medial malleolus and goes along medial surface of the crus near the saphenous nerve. Vena saphena magna of the leg circumflexes posteriorly the medial epicondyles of the femur, then goes upward, lies on the surface of the distal end of the sartorius muscles. Reaching the saphenous opening, it goes through the cribriform fascia, then overpasses the falciform margin on the oval fossa and disembogues into the femoral vein. Numerous subcutaneous veins of the leg and thigh anastomoses with the deep veins of the leg. In the upper region of the femur, the external pudendal vein, superficial circumflex iliac vein, superficial epigastric vein, superficial dorsal vein of the penis and clitoridis, and the anterior scrotal are opened in these veins. The other superficial veins of the lower extremities is the vena saphena parva. Is a continuation of the lateral marginal vein of the foot. It is formed behind the lateral malleolus and goes at first to the lateral edge of the Achilles tendons. This vein gathers blood from the dorsal network of the foot, subcutaneous plantar veins, lateral calcaneus region of the foot. The posterior region of the crus and anastomoses with the long saphenous veins and deep veins of the leg. In the upper third of the crus, vena saphena parva goes between the head of the musculus gastrocnemius and disembogues into the popliteal vein in the popliteal fossa. The deep veins of the lower extremities, the other group, begins from the veins of the plantar venous arch, are paired posterior tibial veins, anastomosed with the paired anterior tibial veins. The posterior tibial vein receives fibular veins, unite with anterior tibial veins, and forms the popliteal vein in the popliteal fossa. The popliteal vein is located between the tibial nerve and popliteal artery, lying closely to the posterior lateral surface of this artery. The small saphenous veins of the leg and veins of the corresponding to the branches of the posterior popliteal artery disembogue into the popliteal vein. The popliteal vein enters the adductor canal and continues thereafter as femoral vein. Therefore, deep veins of the lower extremities the following: paired anterior and posterior tibial vein, unpaired popliteal vein, and greatest femoral vein. Vena femoralis. In the adductor canal lies behind and partially laterally to the femoral artery. From this position, the vein runs under the inguinal ligament into the lacuna vasorum. The veins flowing into the vena femoralis are all finally. On the level of the oval fossa, the large saphenous vein, external genital veins, superficial circumflex iliac vein, and superficial epigastric veins disembogue into the femoral vein. The external pudendal veins, PED, lies adjacent to the arteries of the same name. They gather blood from the lower part of the anterior abdominal wall, scrotum, labium majus, skin of the penis and clitoris. The superficial circumflex vein lies on the lateral surface of the upper part of the thigh, accompanying the arteries of the same name. The superficial epigastric veins, PED, gathers blood from the skin of the inferior region of the anterior abdominal wall. And the other greater system, venous system, who present in our body is the system of the portal vein, of the vena porta. The portal vein gathers blood from the all unpaired organs of the abdominal cavity. The portal vein's length equals 3-4 cm, width 1.1-1.8 cm. The portal vein is formed behind the head of pancreatic gland from inferior and superior mesenteric vein and the splenic vein. The right renal vein goes obliquely from the bottom to the top. The portal vein goes obliquely upwards to the right between the descending part of the duodenum and to the head of the pancreas. Behind the portal vein, the inferior vena cava lies in the hepatoduodenal ligament. The portal vein lies posteriorly between the bile duct and proper hepatic artery. In the liver, the portal vein is divided into the left and right branches, left and right lobes of the liver respectively. The right branch is shorter and wider than the left one. The left branch of the portal vein goes at first in the transversal sulcus of the liver, or porta hepatis, and is divided into small branches in quadrate and chordate lobes. Then it goes into the parenchyma of the liver. The left and right branches of the portal vein are divided into segmental branches. Then they are divided into smaller ones. Interlobular veins inside the hepatic lobulus are divided into wide capillary vessels, so-called sinusoids, which disembogue into the central vein, lying in the center of the hepatic lobule. From each lobule, sublobular veins come out in which interflow and form large veins and at last form 3-4 hepatic veins, which disembogue into the inferior vena cava. As a result, the blood coming into the inferior vena cava from portal vein goes through the two capillary nets, one in the region of influences of the portal vein and the second in the hepatic lobulus. The superior mesenteric veins is the largest influence of the portal vein, which lies on the right from an artery of the same name in the fold of the radix mesentery. This veins gathers blood from the walls of the mesenteric part of the small intestine, its mesentery, mesenteric lymph nodes, cecum, and appendix. Ascending colon from the part of the stomach, greater mentum, duodenum, and pancreas. Into the superior mesenteric veins, 16 to 20 jejunal and ileal veins, ileocolic veins, right and middle colic vein, following the arteries of the same name disembogue. Often into the superior mesenteric vein, the right gastroepiploic vein lying along the greater curvature of stomach is opened. Into the right gastroepiploic vein, gastric vein from walls and fundus of the stomach and veins of the greater omentum. Therefore, this veins is superior mesenteric veins is the greatest influences who carry venous blood to the portal vein. The other greatest tributaries of the portal vein is a splenic vein, vena lienalis. Is formed near the hilum of the spleen as a result of interflow of the left gastroamental vein and veins of the pancreas. The splenic vein lies flat behind the body of pancreas, a little lower than the splenic artery. The end of part of the splenic vein goes across the abdominal part of the aorta on a level of between the celiac trunk and superior mesenteric artery. And the other third greatest tributaries of the portal vein is the inferior mesenteric vein. Vena mesenterica inferior goes up till the level of the duodenal flexure, forming the left border of the inferior duodenal recess of the mesentery. Then the inferior mesenteric vein takes a flexure to the right and behind the pancreas and pairs with the superior mesenteric veins. The smallest influence of the inferior mesenteric veins are the superior rectal vein, the left colic vein, the sigmoid veins. The other specific tributaries of the portal vein is the vena paraumbilicalis. In the number 4-5 begins at the trunk in the paraumbilical region and lie along the round ligament of the liver. Sometimes the paraumbilical veins are opened into the remains of umbilical vein of the fetus in the middle of the round ligaments of the liver. The left paraumbilical vein often is linked by a transverse anastomosis with one of the right paraumbilicus veins. The paraumbilicus veins in the region of the anterior abdominal wall anastomosis with the superior inferior superficial epigastric veins. Besides the connections between the adjacent veins of the human body has intersystematic anastomosis connected the influence of the large veins, the superior, inferior vena cava and portal vein. Therefore, I explain you three greatest venous systems in our body: superior vena cava system, inferior vena cava system and portal veins. On the terminal part of our lecture, I show you the literature where you see this information about the veins and arteries or cardiovascular system in our body. You see, is the following textbook is others Price, Sapien, and C is the other textbook who present in our library. Thanks for your attention.